The applause echoed through the ballroom as Raymond raised his champagne glass and smiled at the guests celebrating his new marriage. "I used to think my first marriage was my greatest failure," he said. "Turns out, walking away was the best decision I ever made." The room erupted with laughter and applause. Near the back, Monique stood silently, hearing every word. Then 3 small children ran toward her. "Mama!" She smiled as the children gathered around her, holding them close for a brief moment before gently reminding them, "Slow feet indoors, sweethearts." It was an ordinary moment. Almost no one noticed. Except Raymond. His smile vanished. The laughter around him suddenly sounded far away. He couldn't explain why he couldn't stop watching her. As Monique quietly turned and walked away with the 3 children without saying a single word to him, one impossible question settled into Raymond's mind. What truth had he walked away from without ever knowing it? Welcome to the Greer Stories. Thank you to everyone who has supported this channel and helped us grow. We truly appreciate every one of you. If you're new here, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe and become part of our growing family. 3 years earlier, Chicago had a way of making ordinary mornings feel rushed before the day had even begun. By 6:30, Monique was already dressed for work, moving quietly through the apartment while the coffee brewed. The television stayed off. The radio stayed off. She had discovered months earlier that silence was easier than pretending either of them still had the energy for small talk before sunrise. Raymond was tying his necktie in the bedroom mirror when she stepped into the doorway. "You'll be home for dinner tonight?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he checked the knot, loosened it, and started over. "I'll try." She smiled anyway. Try usually means no. It means I'll try. There was no irritation in his voice, just exhaustion. Monique nodded, poured his coffee into the travel mug he always carried, and handed it to him as he grabbed his laptop bag. "Thanks. You forgot your lunch." He glanced toward the kitchen counter. "I probably won't get a chance to eat it." "You said that yesterday." "I know. And the day before." "I know." For a second, it felt as though one of them might say something that actually mattered. Neither did. Raymond leaned over, kissed her forehead almost out of habit, and headed for the door. "Drive safe." "You too." The apartment fell quiet again. Monique stood there for another moment, listening to the sound of the elevator doors closing somewhere down the hallway. It hadn't always been like this. When they first married, they had raced each other to the elevator every morning, arguing over whose turn it was to choose dinner after work. They used to send each other photos during lunch just to complain about coworkers or celebrate tiny victories. Even grocery shopping had somehow turned into an excuse to spend another hour together. Now, entire days passed inside practical conversations. Bills, schedules, laundry, work. Nothing was wrong enough to explain the distance growing between them. Yet everything felt different. Raymond spent most of his weekdays inside a downtown financial consulting firm, where deadlines arrived faster than completed projects. Layoffs the previous winter had left fewer employees carrying twice the workload. Every meeting seemed to begin with another reminder about productivity. By mid-morning, he had already skipped breakfast. Again. "You look terrible." He looked up from his computer. Claire stood outside his office holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "I decided you weren't going to remember to eat." He laughed softly. "You're becoming predictable." "So are you." She placed 1 cup beside his keyboard. "You know," she said, "most people blink every once in a while." "I'll remember that." "You won't." Claire worked on the same floor. She wasn't loud or dramatic. She simply had a habit of noticing people before they admitted they needed help. It started with coffee, then occasional lunches, then conversations during late evenings when half the office had already gone home. Neither of them called it friendship. Neither of them questioned why those conversations became easier than the ones waiting at home. Across the city, Monique's office looked nothing like Raymond's. She coordinated community outreach for a nonprofit that partnered with neighborhood schools and family resource centers. The work was meaningful, but the funding was never certain. Every grant application felt like another race against time. By lunchtime, she had already solved 3 scheduling conflicts, comforted an anxious mother whose rent assistance had been delayed, and reorganized an upcoming food distribution after 2 volunteers called in sick. Her coworker Jasmine watched her typing another email. "You've been staring at that screen for 5 minutes. I've written this sentence 4 times. Work email?" Monique shook her head. "No." "Raymond?" Another pause. "I keep trying to figure out how to talk to him without sounding like I'm starting another serious conversation." Jasmine leaned against the desk. "Have you told him that?" "I've told him lots of things." "And?" "He always listens." She stopped herself and smiled without humor. "Actually, he hears me." "That's different." "It is." Jasmine didn't rush to fill the silence. Monique appreciated that. "I don't think he's a bad husband," Monique said after a while. "I think he's tired of feeling like he's disappointing everyone." "And what about you?" She looked down at the unfinished email. "I think I'm tired too." That evening, Raymond's phone buzzed while he was shutting down his computer. "Monique." He stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hey, you still at work?" "Just finishing." "Do you think tonight could finally be our dinner night?" He closed his eyes. He had forgotten. "Again, I don't think I can make it." Silence. Not angry, just quiet. "We've canceled 4 weeks in a row," Monique finally said. "I know. I made reservations." "I'm sorry." "I know." She said it gently, almost kindly. That somehow made it worse. After they hung up, Raymond stayed seated long after everyone else had left. Claire walked past, carrying her bag. "You heading home?" "In a minute." She looked toward the dark office windows. "You've been saying that for an hour." He smiled weakly. "I guess I have." "There are 24 hours in a day," she said. "Work shouldn't get all of them." He almost answered. Instead, he simply picked up his keys. By the time he reached the apartment, the dining table had already been cleared. 2 untouched candles still sat in the middle. Monique was asleep on the couch with a blanket over her shoulders and a book resting upside down across her lap. Raymond quietly switched off the dining room light. He stood there for several seconds, wanting to wake her, wanting to apologize, wanting to explain something he couldn't quite put into words. Instead, he picked up the blanket that had slipped onto the floor, pulled it gently over her shoulder, and walked toward the bedroom. Neither of them realized it then. The biggest threat to their marriage wasn't one explosive argument. It was hundreds of small disappointments that neither of them believed were important enough to fix until they became impossible to ignore. The following Tuesday began like every other workday. Monique answered emails before 8, attended a staff meeting that should have lasted 30 minutes but stretched to nearly 90, then drove across the city to visit a neighborhood resource center. By early afternoon, she found herself unusually tired. She blamed the long hours until Jasmine looked up from her desk and frowned. "You've looked pale all morning." "I'm fine." "You've said that 3 times today." Monique smiled. "That's because everyone keeps asking." "Go home." "I still have 2 appointments." "You'll survive missing them." Monique laughed it off, but halfway through her next meeting, the room tilted for a brief second. It passed almost immediately. That was enough. By 4 o'clock, she stopped at a nearby urgent care clinic, expecting to hear she was exhausted or dehydrated. Instead, the nurse returned with a smile that seemed strangely familiar. "Congratulations." Monique blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You're pregnant." The word settled slowly. Pregnant. She stared at the test results without speaking. "I'd like to schedule an ultrasound," the nurse continued. "It's still early, but we'll know more soon." 2 days later, Monique sat alone inside a softly lit examination room, nervously twisting her wedding ring while waiting for the ultrasound technician. She had spent the previous 48 hours imagining Raymond's reaction. Would he laugh? Cry? Stand there speechless? She couldn't decide. The technician spread the gel across her abdomen and adjusted the monitor. Almost immediately, her expression changed. She looked once, then again, then reached for another measurement. Monique noticed. "Is everything okay?" The technician smiled, trying not to give away too much. "Everything looks wonderful." She turned the screen slightly. "I think you'd better take a look." Monique followed the technician's finger across the monitor. There! A tiny heartbeat. Then another, then a third. The room became very still. Monique looked back at the technician. "I'm sorry." The technician laughed gently. "You heard me correctly." Monique covered her mouth. "Three?" "Three." She laughed, then cried, then laughed again through the tears. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." The technician handed her a tissue. "You've just had a very memorable Thursday." Walking back to her car, Monique kept opening the envelope containing the ultrasound photos as though they might somehow change. 3 tiny lives. She couldn't stop smiling. Her first instinct was to call Raymond. She stopped herself. No, this wasn't something she wanted to say over the phone. It deserved more than that. She left work early for the first time in months. On the drive home, she stopped at a children's bookstore and wandered through the aisles with a smile she couldn't hide. Everything suddenly looked different. Tiny shoes, picture books, baby blankets folded neatly on display tables. She laughed quietly at herself. She wasn't buying anything yet. It simply felt impossible to walk past without imagining what their future might look like. At a small bakery near their apartment, she ordered Raymond's favorite chocolate cake. The owner smiled. "Celebrating something? My husband doesn't know it yet." That's usually the best kind. Back home, she set the cake in the refrigerator, tucked the ultrasound photos inside a small gift box, and placed it on the dining table. She lit 2 candles, checked the clock, then reached for her phone. Raymond answered on the second ring. "Hey, are you busy?" "A little." "What's up?" "I need you to come home tonight." He glanced through the glass wall of the conference room. His manager was already waving everyone back inside. "I was hoping we could have dinner." "This isn't about dinner." Something in her voice made him sit straighter. "What happened?" She smiled to herself. "Nothing bad." "You sure?" "I'm sure." A pause. I really need you home tonight." He relaxed. "Okay." "You promise?" "I promise." She let out a slow breath. "Don't stay late." "I won't." "And Raymond?" "Yeah? This is important." "I know. I mean, really important." "I'll be there." She ended the call with a smile she hadn't worn in months. 6 o'clock became 7. 7 became 8. The candles burned lower. Monique reheated dinner once, then again. At the office, Raymond shut his laptop, grabbed his jacket, and stood. "I thought you left an hour ago." He turned. Claire was gathering her things. "I was about to." "You say that every night." He looked at his phone. 3 missed messages from Monique. No panic. Just simple check-ins. "Leaving soon? Everything okay? I'm waiting." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "I should go." "You should." She smiled. "Come downstairs first." "What for?" "I'm starving. 10 minutes." "I really can't." "You've skipped lunch." "I know. So have I." She shrugged. 10 minutes. Raymond hesitated. 10 minutes wasn't much. Monique would understand. He followed Claire downstairs to the cafe across the street. 10 minutes became 30. They talked about work, office politics, upcoming projects. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing that felt like betrayal. Yet Raymond noticed something he hadn't admitted to himself before. Conversation felt easy. There was no disappointment in Claire's voice, no difficult questions, no reminders about everything he hadn't managed to fix. His phone buzzed again. He looked. "Are you close?" He started typing. "Leaving now." Before he hit send, another coworker joined the table with a question about a client presentation. The conversation shifted again. His message remained unfinished. Back at the apartment, Monique looked toward the hallway every time footsteps echoed outside the door. 9:15. She called. No answer. 9:40. She called again. This time Raymond picked up. "Hey." The noise behind him told her he still wasn't home. "I thought you were leaving." "I know. I'm on my way." "When?" "Soon." She closed her eyes. "Raymond." "I'm sorry. I asked you for one night." "I know. No." Her voice cracked despite her effort to steady it. You don't. Silence settled between them. I have something that will change both of our lives. He leaned against the wall outside the cafe. Whatever it was, it could wait one more hour. He believed that. I'll be there, he said softly. I promise. Monique looked at the tiny gift box sitting in the center of the table. The candles had nearly burned out. I'll wait. When the call ended, she stayed exactly where she was. 10 o'clock passed, then 11. Outside, the city continued as though nothing remarkable had happened. Inside the apartment, dinner had gone cold. The cake remained untouched. The small gift box never left the table. And without either of them realizing it, the conversation that was supposed to change both of their lives quietly became the conversation they would never have. Raymond unlocked the apartment a little after midnight. The lights in the dining room were still on. 2 candles had burned down into uneven pools of wax. Dinner sat untouched in the middle of the table, covered with foil that no longer held any warmth. His eyes stopped on the small gift box. He smiled to himself. Monique? No answer. He picked up the box, turning it over in his hands. There wasn't a tag, just a pale blue ribbon tied neatly across the top. For a moment, he thought about opening it. Instead, he placed it back exactly where he had found it. She probably wanted us to open it together, he murmured. He walked into the bedroom. Monique wasn't asleep. She was sitting against the headboard, still wearing the sweater she'd left work in hours earlier. You waited up. I did. I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Were you working? Raymond hesitated. I finished work. And then? I grabbed something to eat. With who? Claire. The answer came so easily that he almost missed what it meant. Monique lowered her eyes. I see. It wasn't planned. I believe you. Those 4 words should have comforted him. Instead, they sounded strangely empty. He sat on the edge of the bed. I know tonight mattered. You don't know why. No, but you knew it mattered. He rubbed his forehead. I honestly thought it could wait until tomorrow. She looked toward the dining room. So did I. Neither of them raised their voices. Neither accused the other. That was somehow worse. After several minutes, Raymond reached for her hand. She let him hold it, but she didn't hold his back. That was the first time he noticed. He would remember that feeling years later. At the time, he convinced himself they simply needed sleep. The next morning, Monique left for work before Raymond woke up. The gift box was gone. He assumed she had hidden it somewhere for another day. He never asked. She never mentioned it again. Life moved forward, at least on the surface. Over the following weeks, Monique attended doctor's appointments alone. The first time she heard all 3 heartbeats together, she instinctively reached for the empty chair beside her. The nurse noticed. Would you like me to bring your husband in? Monique offered a polite smile. He's working. Every appointment seemed to end with the same question. Will your husband be joining you next time? I hope so. Eventually, even she stopped believing that answer. She carried the ultrasound photos home in her purse. She imagined showing them to Raymond after a good day instead of a stressful one. Then, after the next weekend. Then, after his project ended. There was always another reason to wait. And with each passing week, telling him somehow became more difficult. Raymond noticed changes, but not the ones that mattered. Monique became quieter. She stopped asking him to come home early. She no longer made dinner reservations weeks in advance. When he worked late, she simply texted, "Drive safely." At first, he thought things were improving. The arguments had disappeared. The difficult conversations had stopped. Home felt calmer. He mistook silence for healing. He didn't realize silence had replaced hope. Claire became a regular part of Raymond's workdays. Sometimes they shared lunch. Sometimes they stayed late preparing presentations. Sometimes they talked about families, childhood memories, and future plans while the office slowly emptied around them. Nothing physical happened between them. Not once. But emotional distance has a way of creating room for someone else. Raymond began telling Claire things he hadn't told Monique in months. How overwhelmed he felt. How afraid he was of disappointing everyone. How work no longer felt rewarding. Claire listened. She didn't offer solutions. She simply listened. That became the problem. The change didn't go unnoticed. One Friday afternoon, Raymond's older sister, Denise, stopped by their apartment carrying homemade lasagna. She looked around. "Where's Monique?" "Still at work." Denise unpacked the dish onto the counter. "You two okay?" "Why wouldn't we be?" "I don't know." She shrugged. "You don't smile when you talk about her anymore." Raymond laughed awkwardly. "We're just busy." She studied him. "You know, busy marriages don't usually become distant overnight." "They don't. They become distant, one ignored conversation at a time." He looked away. "I think she's unhappy." Denise folded her arms. "Is she?" "I don't know." "You should." Before leaving, she rested a hand on his shoulder. "Don't wait until she's gone to find out what she was trying to tell you." The words lingered after she left. Raymond considered calling Monique. Instead, another email arrived from work. He answered that first. Families often create stories to explain what they don't understand. Monique's mother noticed she had lost weight. Her younger brother noticed she no longer laughed as easily. They asked questions. Monique answered as gently as she could. "We're having a hard season." Raymond's relatives heard something different. Someone mentioned Monique had become too emotional. Another relative added that she had started withdrawing from everyone. By the next family gathering, quiet concern had turned into confident opinions. "I think marriage has been harder on her than she expected. She always seemed sensitive. Raymond's trying his best." Nobody intended to be cruel, but assumptions have a way of spreading faster than truth. Raymond heard the comments. He never corrected them, not because he wanted to embarrass Monique, because he thought they were mostly accurate. He believed she had become emotionally overwhelmed. He never stopped to ask why. Months later, Monique sat alone in a lawyer's office. The divorce papers rested neatly on the polished wooden desk between them. The attorney adjusted his glasses. "Are you certain?" Monique looked down at the documents. "I've spent a year hoping my husband would choose our marriage without being asked. And now? I don't want someone to stay because I convinced them." The attorney nodded slowly. "There's one more question I have to ask." She looked up. "Does your husband know about the pregnancy?" The room fell silent. Monique rested a hand lightly against her growing stomach. Tears threatened, but she kept her voice steady. "No. Do you intend to tell him before these papers are filed?" She closed her eyes for only a moment, then shook her head. "I won't bring children into someone's life as proof that they should love us. But they deserve to know their father. They deserve a father who wants to be there." She swallowed hard. "If Raymond ever chooses us, I want it to be because he finally understands what he lost." Another quiet moment passed. "If he never does." She managed a fragile smile. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure they never feel unwanted." The attorney slid a box of tissues across the desk. She accepted one. Not because she had changed her mind, because she understood exactly what saying goodbye would cost. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Raymond walked out of the courthouse believing Monique had stopped fighting for their marriage. Monique walked out believing Raymond had already chosen a future that no longer included her. Neither of them knew they were carrying completely different versions of the same ending. And somewhere beneath Monique's heartbeat, 3 tiny lives continued growing quietly, untouched by the misunderstandings that had already changed the course of their parents' lives forever. 3 years later, Monique's mornings no longer belonged to her. They belonged to 3 alarm clocks with very different personalities. "Mama," Aiden's voice echoed from the hallway before the sun had fully risen. "I got dressed." Monique looked up from the lunchboxes she was packing and smiled. "Did you?" He ran into the kitchen wearing his dinosaur shirt backwards and one sock. "I almost did." She laughed. "I can see that." Before she could fix his shirt, another voice floated from the bedroom. "Mama, Avery's taking my bunny." "I am not." "You are." "I'm borrowing it." Monique rinsed her hands and walked toward the room. Aria stood with her arms folded tightly across her chest while Avery hugged a faded stuffed rabbit almost as big as she was. "It's my turn." "You had it yesterday," Avery argued. "I had it during nap time." Girls both looked at their mother. What's our rule? Neither answered. She waited. Finally, Arya sighed. We ask. And? We don't grab. Monique nodded. So? Avery slowly handed the rabbit back. I'm sorry. Arya hugged it for exactly 3 seconds before offering it back. We can both have it. Monique smiled. Now that sounds like my girls. Moments later, another crash came from the kitchen. Aiden, again. He had somehow knocked an entire box of cereal onto the floor while trying to pour breakfast by himself. He looked at the mess, then at his mother. I wanted to help. I know you did. She handed him the dustpan. So my helper gets to help clean too. Okay. Within minutes, the 3 children were laughing over spilled cereal as though it had been part of the morning's entertainment all along. Their apartment wasn't large. It wasn't luxurious. But every wall carried evidence of a family being built with intention. Crayon drawings covered one section of the refrigerator. A height chart stretched along the hallway. Tiny shoes collected near the front door, despite Monique reminding them every evening to put them away. The apartment felt lived in, loved, safe. By 8 o'clock, Monique had already packed 3 lunches, braided Arya's hair after 2 failed attempts because she refused to sit still, found Avery's missing shoe inside the laundry basket, and convinced Aiden that superheroes also brush their teeth before saving the world. Do superheroes eat apples? They do. What about broccoli? They complained first. He grinned. I knew it. The preschool teachers greeted the family by name. Good morning, Team Walker. The children ran inside together before turning back. 3 voices called out almost in perfect harmony. Love you, Mama. I love you more. You always say that, because it's always true. She waited until they disappeared into their classroom before returning to her car. For the first time that morning, silence. She sat behind the steering wheel for nearly a minute without starting the engine, not because she was sad, because the quiet felt unfamiliar after the joyful chaos. Monique's life had become carefully organized. Every dollar had a purpose. She kept a handwritten budget inside a notebook tucked beside the refrigerator. Rent, utilities, groceries, preschool tuition, emergency savings. The emergency fund grew slowly. Some months it didn't grow at all. Still, she refused to stop trying. She accepted extra community outreach projects whenever they became available. Some evenings she reviewed grant applications after the children were asleep. Other nights she folded laundry while listening to recorded training sessions for nonprofit leadership programs she hoped would lead to a promotion someday. She wasn't chasing wealth. She was chasing stability. There was a difference. Saturday mornings belonged to the neighborhood library. The children's librarian smiled the moment the triplets walked through the doors. My favorite troublemakers are back. We're not troublemakers, Avery protested. The librarian raised an eyebrow. Who tried hiding inside the reading fort last week? Aiden slowly raised one hand. That was mostly me. I remember. Each child headed toward a different shelf. Aiden always chose books about trucks, dinosaurs, or firefighters. Arya collected anything involving animals. Avery preferred stories about families and adventures. Monique watched them spread through the children's section and felt something she hadn't expected after the divorce. Peace. Not every day, not every hour, but enough. Enough to recognize it when it arrived. Questions about their father came slowly. The first one happened during a school art project. One evening, Aiden carried home a drawing with 3 smiling children, 1 woman, and a blank space beside them. Mrs. Reynolds said some families have dads at home. They do. Where's ours? Monique paused while helping Avery wash paint from her hands. She had prepared herself for this day. She simply hadn't known when it would come. She dried her hands and sat on the living room rug. Come here. All 3 children climbed into her lap in the uncoordinated way only siblings could. Your daddy lives somewhere else. Does he know us? The question caught in her chest. She chose each word carefully. He knows I loved him very much once. The children waited. And sometimes grown-ups make choices they don't fully understand until much later. Is he mean? No. Does he not like kids? I don't believe that either. Arya leaned against her shoulder. Then why isn't he here? Monique kissed the top of her daughter's head. I think that's a question only he can answer one day. She refused to poison their hearts with bitterness. They deserved the chance to form their own opinions, if that day ever came. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Monique stepped onto the apartment balcony with a mug of tea. The city lights stretched across the Chicago skyline. Her phone buzzed. Jasmine, how are my favorite 4 people? Tired, I figured. You? The same. Jasmine laughed. How'd the parent-teacher conference go? Aiden talks too much. I could have guessed that. Aria tried comforting another little girl who missed her mom. That sounds like Aria. And Avery convinced everyone to trade snacks. Jasmine burst out laughing. She's going into business. Monique smiled. Probably. A comfortable silence settled over the call. Finally, Jasmine asked, Do you ever think about him anymore? Monique didn't answer immediately. She watched traffic moving several stories below. Not the way I used to. I don't wake up angry. Good. I don't spend time wondering what I could have done differently. Even better, what I think about now. She looked through the apartment window. The children were asleep beneath superhero blankets, storybooks scattered across the bedroom floor. Is whether these 3 little people feel safe. And they do. Then you've already won. Monique smiled to herself. Winning wasn't the word she would have chosen. There had been no victory in losing a marriage, no celebration in becoming a single mother, but there was something quietly satisfying about watching 3 children laugh without carrying the weight of adult mistakes. That mattered, more than proving anyone wrong, more than rewriting old arguments, more than wondering whether Raymond ever regretted leaving. She switched off the balcony light and stepped back inside. 3 tiny backpacks waited by the front door for Monday morning. 3 lunchboxes sat drying beside the sink. 3 little voices would wake her before sunrise. For years, Monique had measured her life by everything she thought she had lost. She no longer did. Now she measured it by bedtime stories, scraped knees, birthday candles, first words, tiny hugs that arrived without warning, and 3 children who had unknowingly taught her that healing wasn't a single moment. Sometimes healing looked like an ordinary Tuesday morning, a messy kitchen floor, and hearing 3 little voices call out the same word before school. Mama. And every single time they did, Monique answered with the same quiet certainty. I'm right here. 3 years had changed Raymond's life in ways that looked impressive from the outside. He had accepted a promotion at the consulting firm 6 months after the divorce. The longer hours eventually led to a larger office, a better salary, and the kind of professional reputation he'd spent years chasing. His co-workers admired his discipline. Clients requested him by name. His parents proudly told friends that he had finally found his footing. It was the version of success he had imagined years earlier. Yet the apartment he returned to each evening often felt quieter than he expected. Not lonely, just quiet. Claire had become more than a co-worker. The friendship that had slowly grown during Raymond's marriage eventually turned into a relationship after the divorce was finalized. Neither of them had planned it. At least, that was the story they both believed. Claire was easy to be around. She laughed often. She didn't hold on to disagreements. When work became stressful, she rarely wanted to spend the evening talking about it. Instead, she'd suggest ordering takeout or walking along the Chicago River before heading home. Life with her felt uncomplicated. That was part of the reason Raymond proposed. One Saturday afternoon, surrounded by family in Claire's parents' backyard, he slipped a ring onto her finger. She laughed through happy tears. Are you sure? I'm sure. You didn't even let me finish asking if you were serious. I've been serious for months. Their families applauded. Phones appeared almost instantly to capture the moment. Someone popped open a bottle of champagne. Claire hugged her parents before finding Raymond again. We're actually doing this. We are. He smiled. It looked genuine, mostly because it was. A week later, Raymond's mother invited them to dinner. Halfway through the meal, she reached across the table and squeezed Claire's hand. I've never seen Raymond this relaxed. Claire smiled politely. I'm glad. His mother looked toward her son. You've laughed more this past year than you did during your entire first marriage. Raymond lowered his fork. His father nodded in agreement. Some people simply aren't compatible. No, his aunt added. You tried your best. Another relative joined in. Relationships shouldn't feel that difficult. Claire shifted uncomfortably. She hadn't known Monique well, only through brief introductions years earlier. She glanced toward Raymond. He said nothing. The conversation continued around him. I always felt like Monique expected too much. She worried about everything. Poor Raymond was constantly trying to keep the peace. Each sentence became slightly more certain than the one before it. Not one person in the room had actually lived inside the marriage. Yet somehow everyone seemed confident they understood why it ended. Claire reached beneath the table and lightly touched Raymond's wrist. You okay? He nodded. Yeah. But his appetite had disappeared. A few days later, Claire found him standing beside the office window long after everyone else had left. You've been staring outside for 10 minutes. I didn't realize. She walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee, an old habit neither of them had outgrown. You've been distracted all week. It's nothing. I know that tone. He accepted the coffee. My family talked about Monique at dinner. Claire waited. They made it sound simple. And it wasn't? Raymond took a slow sip before answering. I don't know. She looked at him carefully. That's different from what you've always said. I used to think I understood everything. And now? He shrugged. I remember pieces. What kind of pieces? He stared through the glass again. Little things. She didn't interrupt. The way she'd wait up for me. He laughed quietly to himself. I used to tell her not to. Claire remained silent. She always wanted us to talk. You didn't? I always thought tomorrow would be better. Another pause. I don't even remember what half those conversations were supposed to be about anymore. Claire leaned against the window. Do you miss her? He answered more quickly than she expected. No. The word came without hesitation. Then he looked down into his untouched coffee. I miss believing I was a better husband than I probably was. Claire reached for his hand. You've changed. I hope so. I know so. He smiled. This time, the smile stayed. Wedding planning quickly filled their weekends. Cake tastings, venue tours, guest lists, the florist, the photographer, the seating chart. Claire enjoyed every detail. Raymond participated willingly, though not enthusiastically. One evening, they sat surrounded by invitation samples across the dining table. Claire held up 2 designs. This one? Raymond looked briefly. Looks good. You didn't even read it. I trust you. She laughed. You're impossible. He smiled. That's why you're marrying me. She slid another envelope toward him. We should decide about your guest list. He glanced down. Family, friends, co-workers, college roommates. His eyes stopped. What about Monique? The question surprised them both. Claire looked up. You want to invite her? I don't know. Do you? He leaned back in his chair. I guess. He searched for the right words. It feels strange not to. Claire watched him carefully. Would you be inviting her because you want her there? Or because you want her to see you've moved on? The room became very quiet. Raymond looked at the unfinished guest list. I hadn't thought about it like that. I know. She reached across the table. I don't mind if you invite her. You don't? No. Claire smiled gently. If we've built something real together, then I don't need to compete with your past. He looked at her for a long moment. Thank you. But... She hesitated. If you do invite her, make sure you're doing it for the right reason. Later that night, after Claire had gone to bed, Raymond remained at the dining table with the guest list. He picked up a pen, wrote Monique's name, then crossed it out. A few seconds later, he wrote it again. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps curiosity, perhaps pride. Maybe all three. Finally, he folded the list and carried it into the bedroom. The next morning, Claire found the finalized invitations ready to be mailed. Monique's name was included. She didn't question it. Neither of them noticed Raymond standing beside the mailbox for several extra seconds after dropping the envelopes inside. He watched the metal door swing shut, then turned and walked away. He told himself it was only an invitation, nothing more. He never stopped to consider that some invitations don't reopen relationships. They reopen unfinished truths, and one envelope was already making its way across Chicago toward a woman who had spent 3 years building a peaceful life without him. The invitation arrived on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. Monique found it tucked between a utility bill, a grocery store flyer, and a preschool newsletter as she unlocked her mailbox after work. She almost missed it. The thick ivory envelope looked more expensive than everything else she was carrying. Her name was written in careful black script. For a second she smiled, assuming it was another fundraising gala for the nonprofit. Then she saw the return address. She stopped walking. The parking lot suddenly felt much quieter. She didn't need to open it to know who had sent it. Still, she did. Inside rested a formal wedding invitation. Raymond Carter and Claire Benson request the honor of your presence as they celebrate their marriage. Monique stared at the words without moving. She expected sadness. Instead, what surprised her most was how little she felt. Not because the memories were gone, because time had softened them. She carefully slid the invitation back into the envelope and continued upstairs. The children were already waiting at the apartment door with Mrs. Evelyn Harper, the retired school teacher who watched them for an hour after preschool while Monique finished work. "Mama!" 3 little bodies rushed toward her at once. Aiden proudly held up a paper airplane. "I made it myself." "It flew into the fish tank," Mrs. Harper said with a smile. "Only once," Aiden corrected. Aria had painted a picture of a rainbow that somehow included 2 suns. Avery insisted one of the suns belonged to tomorrow. Monique laughed. "I'll need you to explain that to me later." Mrs. Harper noticed the unopened expression on Monique's face. "Everything all right?" Monique looked down at the envelope still tucked beneath her arm. "Just mail." Mrs. Harper nodded but didn't press further. She had lived long enough to recognize the difference between ordinary mail and the kind people carried without realizing it. After dinner, bath time, and 3 bedtime stories, one involving dinosaurs, another a princess who refused to live in a castle, and a third about a dog who kept stealing pancakes, the apartment finally grew quiet. Monique carried the invitation to the kitchen. She read it again, then unfolded the small handwritten card tucked inside. "Monique, I hope you've found happiness. Claire and I wanted to extend this invitation personally. Looking back, I think we've both learned that we simply weren't the right people for each other. Some relationships are meant to teach us where we truly belong. I genuinely wish you the best. Raymond." Monique read it twice, not because she didn't understand it, because she did. The words were polite, measured, carefully written, yet they carried something underneath them. The quiet certainty that he finally understood their marriage. She folded the note, walked to the trash can, dropped both the invitation and the envelope inside, then switched off the kitchen light. That should have been the end of it. The next morning, she found herself standing in front of the trash can while making coffee. She stared at it for several seconds. Finally, she reached inside and pulled the envelope back out, not because she planned to go, because she wasn't ready to admit the invitation had unsettled her. She slipped it into a drawer instead. Out of sight, out of mind, or so she hoped. Saturday afternoon brought one of the neighborhood's annual block parties. Children chased bubbles through the park, while parents balanced paper plates and folding chairs beneath the shade of old maple trees. Mrs. Evelyn Harper sat knitting beside the playground. She watched Monique helping Avery climb the jungle gym. "You've been thinking." Monique laughed softly. "Is it that obvious? You've tied Aria's shoe twice." Monique looked down. Aria was wearing sandals. She smiled despite herself. "I got an invitation." Mrs. Harper nodded. "His wedding. You knew?" "The mail carrier talks too much." Monique shook her head, laughing for the first time all day. "I threw it away." "And then?" "I took it back out. Mrs. Harper wasn't surprised. "What are you afraid of?" "I'm not afraid." The older woman looked at her over the top of her glasses. "No?" Monique sighed. "I don't belong there." "Maybe. I don't know anyone." "You know one person." "I knew one person." Mrs. Harper tucked another loop of yarn through her knitting. "When my husband passed away, I stopped attending community events for almost 2 years." Monique listened quietly. "I convinced myself people would only remember me as the woman whose husband died." "What changed?" "One little girl." Mrs. Harper smiled toward the playground. "She asked why I'd disappeared." Monique waited. I realized I'd been allowing other people to finish writing my story. The sounds of children laughing drifted across the park. Mrs. Harper set the knitting in her lap. "Tell me something." "What?" "When people hear Raymond's version of your marriage." Monique looked away. "What do you think they believe?" She didn't answer. Because she already knew. Mrs. Harper continued gently. "If you stay home." She paused until Monique looked back at her. "People will remember only the story someone else told about you." The words settled quietly. There was no dramatic revelation, no sudden decision, just a thought that refused to leave. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Monique opened the kitchen drawer again. She removed the invitation. This time, she didn't read Raymond's note. She already knew every word. Instead, she looked at the date. The wedding was 2 weeks away. She imagined the ballroom, the guests, the conversations, people who believed they already understood why her marriage had ended. She wasn't angry. She wasn't interested in proving Raymond wrong, and she certainly wasn't hoping to interrupt his wedding. She simply realized something that hadn't seemed important before. For 3 years, she had protected her peace. She didn't need to hide inside it. The next morning, while Aiden searched for a missing sneaker and the girls argued over matching hair ribbons, Monique picked up her phone. She called the number printed on the RSVP card. "Good morning," a cheerful voice answered. "Wedding coordination." "Hello." Monique took a steady breath. "My name is Monique Walker." A brief pause. "I'm calling about an invitation." "Yes? I'll be attending." She ended the call before she had time to second-guess herself. Across the room, Aiden looked up. "Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Who were you talking to?" Monique smiled as she helped him tie his shoelaces. "Someone who's expecting to see me." Aiden nodded, as though that answered everything. To him, it did. To Monique, it was something else entirely. She wasn't going to Raymond's wedding to revisit the past. She was going because she had spent too many years letting silence speak for her. This time, she intended to walk into the room with nothing to prove, nothing to take back, and nothing to hide. She had no idea that the quiet decision she made in her small Chicago apartment would lead to the single moment that would unravel everything Raymond believed about the life he had left behind. The ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers as servers moved between tables carrying trays of champagne and plated desserts. A jazz trio played softly near the stage while conversations blended into the comfortable noise that follows a wedding ceremony everyone seems to have enjoyed. At the center of it all stood Raymond. His tie had loosened slightly. His jacket hung open. He looked exactly like a man convinced he had finally reached the chapter of life he'd spent years trying to build. Claire slipped her hand into his. "You survived." He laughed. "So did you." "Barely." She nodded toward the guests. "My aunt cried through the entire ceremony. I think she started before we exchanged vows." "She did." Claire rested her head briefly against his shoulder. "Thank you." "For what?" "For choosing me." Raymond smiled. "I never had any doubts." Across the room, someone tapped a spoon against a champagne glass. "Speech." Several voices joined in. "Speech." Raymond looked toward Claire. "I guess that's my cue." She squeezed his hand. "Go make them love you." He walked toward the microphone as applause spread through the ballroom. His father raised a glass. Friends whistled from the back. Raymond looked across the room, smiling at faces that had supported him through promotions, holidays, birthdays, and eventually a second chance at marriage. He cleared his throat. "I wasn't planning to say much." Laughter. "You don't believe him," someone shouted. "You shouldn't." More laughter. Raymond waited until the room settled. "I've been asked a lot over the last year whether I believe people deserve second chances." He looked at Claire. "I do." She smiled through tears. "I used to think my first marriage was my greatest failure." The ballroom became still. A few relatives exchanged quick glances before returning their attention to him. "Turns out," he smiled, "walking away was the best decision I ever made." The room erupted. Glasses lifted. Several guests applauded before he had even finished speaking. Raymond continued, "Sometimes life teaches you that loving someone isn't enough." He paused. "And sometimes letting go is the only reason you ever find where you truly belong." He reached for Claire's hand. "I found mine." The applause came again. Claire kissed his cheek. Guests stood to toast the newlyweds. From where they sat, Raymond's parents looked relieved. His mother quietly dabbed her eyes with a napkin. His uncle leaned toward another relative. "I always knew he'd be happier." "I did too." It took him a while to see it. The conversation drifted through nearby tables. No one lowered their voice. There was no reason to. As far as they knew, the past had stayed exactly where it belonged. Outside the ballroom doors, the hotel corridor was almost empty. Monique paused beside a large window overlooking downtown Chicago. She could hear faint applause through the closed doors. One of the caregivers beside her adjusted Avery's sweater. "We still have time to leave." Monique looked down at the three children. Aiden was trying to count the lights hanging from the ceiling. Aria had fallen completely asleep against the caregiver's shoulder. Avery studied the floral arrangement near the entrance with serious concentration. Monique smiled. "No, you don't have to do this." "I know." The caregiver searched her face. "Are you sure?" Monique nodded once. "I'm not here to change anyone's day." She looked toward the ballroom doors. "I'm here because I'm tired of letting other people decide how my story ends." The caregiver smiled gently. "I'll stay close." "I know you will." Monique straightened her dress, took a slow breath, and reached for the door. Inside, another round of applause had already begun. Hardly anyone noticed her enter. Why would they? The bride and groom still held everyone's attention. Monique quietly thanked the usher, who pointed her toward her assigned table. She neither hurried nor hesitated. She simply walked. One guest briefly looked up before returning to the conversation at his table. Another assumed she had arrived late because of traffic. Within seconds, the room had forgotten she was there. Exactly as she preferred. Behind her, the caregivers entered with the children. Aiden spotted Monique almost immediately. His face lit up. "Mama!" The word carried farther than he intended. Several nearby guests smiled at the sound without thinking much about it. Three little children running toward their mother wasn't unusual. It happened every day somewhere. Aiden reached her first. Aria slipped her small hand into Monique's without saying anything. Avery wrapped both arms around her mother's waist. Monique laughed softly. "There you are. We found you," Aiden announced proudly. "I can see that. You said not to run." "I did." He lowered his head. "Sorry." She brushed a curl away from his forehead. "It's all right." Then she looked at all three of them. "Slow feet indoors, sweethearts." Three little heads nodded almost together. The children stood close beside her, while the caregivers quietly stepped back. It lasted only a few seconds. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. An ordinary family moment surrounded by an extraordinary celebration. Almost no one noticed, except Raymond. He had been accepting congratulations from another guest when his eyes drifted across the ballroom. At first, he recognized only Monique. The surprise alone was enough to stop him mid-sentence. He hadn't truly expected her to come. Then he noticed the children. 3 of them, roughly the same age. He watched one little boy lean comfortably against Monique's side, while one of the girls absent-mindedly reached for her mother's hand. Raymond frowned. He couldn't explain why he suddenly couldn't look away. The children didn't resemble him enough to invite immediate conclusions. If anything, they looked unmistakably like Monique. Yet something about them tugged at a memory he couldn't quite reach. Aiden laughed at something Avery whispered. The sound echoed faintly across the room. Raymond's fingers tightened around the stem of his champagne glass. "What is it?" Claire's voice came quietly beside him. He blinked. "What?" "You've been staring." He looked away almost immediately. "Sorry. Do you know her?" The question lingered between them. Raymond glanced back toward Monique. She was helping Aria climb into a chair, completely unaware that he was watching. Or perhaps she knew, and simply chose not to acknowledge him. She. He hesitated. "She's my ex-wife." Claire followed his gaze. She had seen photographs years ago, but photographs didn't prepare someone for watching a real person walk into a room carrying a history no one else could see. Claire's expression softened. "I didn't think she'd come." "Neither did I." Neither of them spoke again. Across the ballroom, Monique thanked one of the servers for a glass of water before sitting down with the children beside her. She smiled when Aiden proudly introduced himself to an elderly couple seated nearby. Within minutes, the triplets had become fascinated by the tiny wedding favors placed at each table. Their laughter blended naturally into the room. Ordinary, innocent, completely unaware that one man, standing only a few yards away, had stopped hearing everything else. The music continued. Guests laughed. Champagne glasses touched. The celebration moved forward exactly as it should. Only Raymond remained standing in the middle of it, unable to understand why the happiest day of his new life suddenly felt interrupted by a question he didn't yet know how to ask. The photographer called everyone toward the dance floor for another round of pictures. "Family first," he announced cheerfully. Claire's parents walked forward. Raymond's parents followed. Someone joked about squeezing together. The room filled with easy laughter. Raymond moved where the photographer directed him, smiling when asked, turning slightly when told, placing an arm around Claire's shoulder, because that was what everyone expected. Flash. Another photograph. Perfect. Flash. One more. Raymond never noticed the camera. His eyes kept drifting toward the back of the ballroom. Monique remained at her table, cutting a small piece of cake into even smaller bites for Avery, while reminding Aiden not to swing his legs against the chair. Nothing about the scene should have held his attention. It was ordinary, yet that was exactly what unsettled him. There was no performance, no attempt to make sure anyone was watching, no bitterness, no carefully staged entrance. She simply looked like a mother enjoying an afternoon with her children. "Raymond," the photographer lowered his camera. "Need your eyes over here." "Sorry." Another flash. Claire leaned closer. "You sure you're all right?" "Yeah." "You've gone somewhere?" He forced a smile. "I'm here." But he wasn't, not completely. As dinner continued, conversations rose and fell around the ballroom. An elderly couple seated near Monique smiled at the children. "They're wonderful." "Thank you," Monique replied. "Triplets?" She nodded. "They certainly keep me busy." "I imagine they do." The woman laughed. "They're beautiful." Monique's smile softened. "I think so too." Raymond heard only fragments of the conversation. Triplets. The word reached him clearly. 3. The same age. He looked down into his untouched glass. 3 years. His mind began doing something he hadn't asked it to do. Counting. The divorce had been finalized a little over 3 years ago. Before that, months of separation, arguments, distance, late nights at work. He frowned. The numbers refused to leave him alone. Claire noticed him checking the date printed inside the wedding program. "What are you looking at?" He folded it closed. "Nothing. You've said nothing a lot today." "I know." She studied him for a moment before letting the conversation go. Across the room, Aiden slipped from his chair. "Mama, bathroom." "I'll take him," one of the caregivers offered. "It's all right." Monique stood and took Aiden's hand. "We'll be right back." As they crossed the ballroom, Raymond instinctively stepped aside to let them pass. For the first time that afternoon, they stood only a few feet apart. Monique looked up. Their eyes met. Neither smiled, neither frowned. It lasted no more than 2 seconds. "Hello, Raymond." Her voice sounded exactly as he remembered. Calm, steady, almost gentle. "Monique." He searched her face for anger. He found none. "You look well." So do you. Aiden tugged lightly on Monique's hand. Mama. She looked down immediately. I know, sweetheart. Then she looked back at Raymond. Congratulations. Thank you. Another silence. He wanted to ask something. Anything. Instead, he heard himself say the safest thing he could think of. I didn't know you had. His words stopped before he finished the sentence. Children. He couldn't bring himself to say it. Monique understood anyway. She glanced down at Aiden. They keep life interesting. A tiny smile appeared, then disappeared. I'm glad. So am I. She gave a polite nod. Enjoy your evening. You too. She walked away before either of them could say anything else. Raymond remained exactly where he was. Aiden looked back once while they crossed the room, not with recognition, simply with the innocent curiosity children often have about strangers. Still, something about the little boy's eyes lingered. The memory arrived without warning. Not all at once, just a fragment. Raymond standing outside his office building, his phone vibrating, Monique's name filling the screen. He remembered answering. He remembered hearing traffic. Then her voice, soft, hopeful. Can you come home tonight? He blinked. Another fragment surfaced. This is important. Then, nothing. The memory stopped there. He pressed his fingers against his temple. Why had that conversation returned now? He hadn't thought about it in years. He walked toward the hotel bar, hoping a glass of water would clear his head. Instead, more pieces appeared. The dining table, candles, a small blue ribbon around a gift box. He closed his eyes. He remembered seeing it. He remembered leaving it unopened. What was in that box? The question escaped his lips so quietly that even he barely heard it. Claire found him a few minutes later. There you are. He looked up. I've been looking everywhere. Sorry. The band is about to start. She noticed the untouched glass of water. You haven't had anything. I'm fine. She hesitated. No, you're distracted. Raymond let out a slow breath. Can I ask you something? Of course. If someone tells you, they have something important to say. Claire waited. And you keep putting the conversation off. He stopped. She finished the thought for him. Sometimes you don't get another chance. He looked at her. I don't know why I keep thinking about that. Claire slipped her hand into his. Because seeing Monique brought back memories. Maybe. That's normal. He wanted to believe her. It didn't feel normal. It felt unfinished. The music started again. Guests gathered around the dance floor. Someone called for the newlyweds. Applause filled the ballroom once more. Raymond walked beside Claire, smiling whenever someone looked his way. No one noticed that his attention kept wandering toward the back of the room. Monique was helping Avery into her little coat. The caregivers were gathering the children's things. They weren't staying. A strange urgency settled into Raymond's chest. He looked at the 3 children one last time. Then at Monique. 3 years, 3 children, 1 forgotten phone call, 1 unopened gift box, 1 conversation that never happened. For the first time since the divorce, Raymond realized he no longer trusted the story he had spent years telling himself. And once doubt entered his mind, it refused to leave. As dinner continued, conversations rose and fell around the ballroom. An elderly couple seated near Monique smiled at the children. They're wonderful. Thank you, Monique replied. Triplets? She nodded. They certainly keep me busy. I imagine they do. The woman laughed. They're beautiful. Monique smiled. I think so, too. Raymond heard only fragments of the conversation. Triplets. The word reached him clearly. 3. The same age. He looked down at his untouched glass. 3 years. His mind began doing something he hadn't asked it to do. Counting. The divorce had been finalized a little over 3 years ago. Before that, months of separation, arguments, distance, late nights at work. The numbers refused to leave him alone. Aiden slipped from his chair. Mama, I have to go. One of the caregivers stood. I'll take him. It's all right, Monique said gently. I'll go. She took Aiden's hand, and walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. At almost the same moment, Raymond turned away from another guest. For a brief second, they found themselves walking toward each other. Neither of them had planned it. Neither of them slowed down. When they were only a few feet apart, Monique looked up. Their eyes met. She held his gaze for only a moment. There was no anger, no accusation, no smile, no acknowledgement. She simply looked at him with the quiet composure of someone who no longer expected anything from him. Then she lowered her eyes, adjusted her grip on Aiden's hand, and continued walking. She never said a word. Raymond instinctively stepped aside to let them pass. He turned and watched them disappear down the hallway. Something tightened in his chest, not because she ignored him, because she had once been incapable of walking past him without reaching for his hand. Now she walked by as though he belonged to another lifetime. The memory arrived without warning, not all at once, just a fragment, his phone vibrating, Monique's name on the screen, her voice, "Please come home tonight." Another fragment, "This is important." Then, nothing. The memory stopped there. Raymond stood motionless in the middle of the ballroom, while laughter continued around him. For the first time in 3 years, he no longer trusted the story he had told himself about the end of his marriage. Raymond waited 3 days before trying to contact Monique, not because he had forgotten, because he knew showing up at her door or calling repeatedly would only prove he was still the same man who expected answers on his own terms. On the 4th morning, he opened his phone, found her number, and stared at it for several minutes. He didn't know whether it still belonged to her. He pressed the call button anyway. It rang, once, twice, then voicemail. He ended the call before the tone. A minute later, he typed a message. "Hi, Monique." He erased it. He started again. "I know I probably don't deserve your time, but I'd like to ask you something when you're ready. I'll understand if you don't respond." He read it twice, then sent it. The message showed as delivered. Nothing else. The rest of the week became strangely difficult. Raymond returned to work, attended meetings, answered emails, and smiled through conversations he barely remembered afterward. His mind kept drifting back to the wedding. 3 children. Triplets. The way Monique had walked past him without speaking. Not out of anger. Out of peace. That was the part he couldn't stop thinking about. She hadn't looked like someone trying to make him regret the past. She looked like someone who had already accepted it. Claire noticed the change almost immediately. One evening, she found Raymond sitting alone on their apartment balcony, long after dinner had grown cold. "You've reheated that pasta twice." He looked over his shoulder. "I didn't realize." She sat beside him. "You're thinking about the wedding." He nodded. "I keep replaying it." She waited. Finally, he said, "Do you ever have a memory that suddenly feels incomplete?" Claire frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You remember what happened." He looked out toward the city lights. "But one small piece doesn't make sense anymore." She rested her hands around her coffee mug. "Is this about Monique?" "Yes." Claire took a slow breath. "I had a feeling." He looked at her. "I don't know why seeing her affected me like that. Maybe because it reminded you of a version of yourself you haven't thought about in years." He considered that. "Maybe." She hesitated before asking the question that had been quietly sitting between them since the wedding. "Are you trying to get her back?" Raymond answered before she had even finished. "No." The answer came with certainty. "This isn't about that." "What is it about?" He looked down at his hands. "I don't know." Then, after a long silence, he admitted the truth. "I think it's about something I never understood." Claire studied his face for a moment before nodding. "If you need answers." She chose her next words carefully. "Then get answers." He looked surprised. "You mean that?" "I married you because I trust the man you are now." She gave him a small, tired smile. "Not because I wanted you to pretend your past never happened." Raymond reached across the space between them and squeezed her hand. "Thank you. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "If Monique agrees to meet you." He waited. "Go there looking for the truth, not forgiveness." He nodded. "I will." 5 days passed. No reply. Raymond sent nothing else. He had spent years making Monique feel as though her words could wait. He refused to repeat that mistake by demanding a response. Instead, he waited. On the sixth evening, his phone vibrated. One message. From Monique. I received your message. Nothing more. He stared at the screen for several seconds before typing, "Thank you for answering." Again, he erased it. Then tried again. "Would you be willing to meet? If the answer is no, I'll respect it." He sent the message. This time the response came nearly an hour later. Why? The single word carried no anger, only caution. Raymond looked at the blinking cursor for a long time. He considered writing about the wedding, about the children, about the questions that had kept him awake. Instead, he chose honesty. "Because I don't think I understood the end of our marriage as well as I believed I did." He pressed send, then placed the phone face down on the kitchen table. He wasn't expecting an answer that night. He was wrong. One conversation, public place. Nothing about this changes the past. He read the message 3 times, then replied, "Thank you. Where would you feel comfortable?" They settled on a small cafe in Lincoln Park. It wasn't halfway between their homes. It wasn't chosen for convenience. Monique chose it because she knew the owner. It was quiet, well lit, always busy enough that neither of them would feel trapped in the conversation. She also made one more decision. The children would not be there. Mrs. Evelyn Harper agreed to keep them for the afternoon without asking unnecessary questions. "You look nervous," Mrs. Harper observed while helping Avery button her sweater. "I am." "Scared?" Monique thought about it. "No." "Then what?" She smiled faintly. "I don't know what version of Raymond is going to walk through that cafe door." "Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. "That's fair." Monique picked up her handbag. "I've spent 3 years building a peaceful life." "You have?" "I'm not going there to reopen old wounds." "I know. I'm going because there are questions that deserve honest answers." Mrs. Harper walked her to the front door. Before Monique left, the older woman gently touched her arm. "You don't owe anyone your forgiveness." Monique smiled. "I know. You also don't owe anyone your anger." "I know that too." Mrs. Harper opened the door. "Then go as the woman you've become. Not the woman who got divorced. Not the woman who cried beside an unopened gift box. Not the woman who waited until midnight, hoping her husband would come home." Monique stepped outside. She carried none of those versions of herself into the car. She carried only the quiet confidence she had earned over the last 3 years. Raymond arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. He chose a table near the window and ordered nothing more than black coffee. Twice he checked his watch. 3 times he stood before sitting again. Every time the door opened, his eyes lifted. At exactly 2 o'clock, the bell above the entrance chimed once more. Monique walked inside. She wore a simple navy blue coat and carried no trace of the woman who had once begged him to come home. Their eyes met. Neither smiled immediately. Neither looked away. 3 years earlier, they had ended a marriage believing silence would protect them both. Now, for the first time since signing the divorce papers, they were about to discover what that silence truly cost. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The server approached with 2 menus. "Can I get either of you something to drink?" "Coffee," Monique said. "The same," Raymond added. The server smiled, collected the menus, and walked away. Silence settled over the table again. Not uncomfortable, simply unfamiliar. Raymond noticed Monique no longer wore her wedding ring. Of course she didn't. Neither did he. Still, seeing the empty space on her hand made the years between them feel real. "You look well," he said quietly. "So do you." Neither of them tried to continue the conversation. The words had only been an acknowledgement that they were sitting across from each other after 3 years. Nothing more. The coffees arrived. The server left. Raymond wrapped both hands around the warm mug without taking a sip. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't." "What changed your mind?" Monique looked out the cafe window for a moment before answering. "I've spent enough years letting unanswered questions stay unanswered." He nodded. "I understand." She looked back at him. "Do you?" The question wasn't sharp. It was honest. Raymond lowered his eyes. I'm trying to. Another quiet moment passed. Finally, he spoke. I keep thinking about the wedding. Monique waited. The children. She didn't interrupt. There. He hesitated. About 3. She nodded once. They turned 3 this spring. He swallowed. The numbers he'd been trying to ignore settled heavily in his mind. 3 years. His voice grew quieter. They're triplets. Yes. He looked into his coffee, then back at Monique. I know this isn't my business. She said nothing. But I need to ask. His fingers tightened around the mug. Who is their father? The cafe seemed to disappear. The conversations at nearby tables faded into background noise. Monique held his gaze for several long seconds. Then she answered. You are. Raymond didn't move. He didn't blink. For a moment, it was as though he hadn't understood the words. Then the meaning reached him. His face lost all color. No. The whisper escaped before he could stop it. Monique remained silent. He searched her expression, hoping to find uncertainty. There was none. His chair creaked softly as he leaned back. He tried again. I didn't know. I know. His breathing became uneven. When? The week before everything ended. His mind raced. The phone call. She nodded. I asked you to come home because I wanted to tell you. His eyes closed. The memory returned with painful clarity. Please come home tonight. I have something important to tell you. He covered his mouth with one hand. The gift box. The ultrasound photographs. His shoulders slumped. I never opened it. I know. His eyes filled before he realized it. You were pregnant. Yes. With all 3? Yes. He stared at the table. 3 children, 3 birthdays, 3 first smiles, 3 first words, 3 first steps, 3 first days of preschool, 3 years. Gone. Not stolen. Missed. His voice cracked. I wasn't there. No, I wasn't there for any of it. Monique didn't answer. There was nothing she could add. The truth was already doing its work. Raymond rubbed both hands across his face. I kept telling myself. He stopped. Telling yourself what? That our marriage ended because we stopped understanding each other. Monique looked at him calmly. We did. But that's not the whole story. No. He let out a slow, unsteady breath. I should have come home. You should have. I should have listened. Yes. I should have asked why it was important. Another quiet pause. You should have. There was no anger in her voice, only truth. Somehow, that hurt more. He looked at her again. Why didn't you tell me after? The question hung between them. Monique rested both hands around her cup. I thought about it. When? The next morning. She looked down briefly. Then, the next week. And after that? After every doctor's appointment. He listened without interrupting. I kept waiting for something to change. What? You, he frowned. I wanted you to choose our marriage because you wanted to be there. Not because I was pregnant. Every time I asked you to come home. She paused. Something else mattered more. He couldn't argue, because it was true. I watched you slowly build a life that no longer had room for us. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse him. She simply described what she had lived. I realized something. What? I could tell you about the babies. She swallowed. You probably would have stayed. He looked up immediately. I would have. I know. Her answer surprised him. I believe you. He stared at her. But I also believe. She held his eyes. That you would have stayed because you felt responsible. Not because you'd chosen us. The words settled heavily between them. I didn't want our children growing up wondering whether their father stayed because he loved being there. She paused. Or because leaving would have made him look like a bad man. Raymond lowered his head. Tears slipped onto the table before he noticed them. I'm so sorry. Monique didn't reach across the table. She didn't pull away either. She simply let him have the moment. I've imagined this conversation 100 different ways. His voice shook. In none of them did I think. He couldn't finish. Monique quietly did it for him. That you had already become a father. He nodded. I missed everything. The weight of that sentence lingered, not because Monique repeated it, because neither of them needed to. For the first time since their marriage ended, Raymond understood that the greatest loss of his life hadn't happened on the day the divorce papers were signed. It had happened the night he chose to believe that one more conversation could always wait. Part 3, a boundary that cannot be crossed. Neither of them spoke for a while. The server stopped by to refill their coffee. Seeing the silence between them, she quietly topped off the cups and moved on. Raymond watched the steam rise before finally finding his voice. Do they? He stopped. Monique waited. Do they know about me? They know they have a father. He looked up. I've never lied to them. She folded her hands together. When they ask where you are, I tell them the truth. What truth? That you live somewhere else. And that's all? For now. He nodded slowly. It was more kindness than he deserved. They don't hate you. The words caught him by surprise. They can't. Monique gave a faint shake of her head. They've never met you. Raymond closed his eyes for a moment. He tried to picture them saying the word Dad. He couldn't. Every image in his mind belonged to someone else's life. Finally, he looked back at Monique. I'd like to meet them. She had expected those words. Her answer came gently. No. He didn't argue. He simply absorbed the answer. I understand why you'd ask. She kept her voice calm. But my answer is still no. He swallowed. Is it because you're angry? No. Then why? Monique took a slow breath. Because they're children. He listened. They don't know the history. They don't understand guilt. They don't understand regret. She held his gaze. And they shouldn't have to carry either one. Raymond looked down at the table. I don't want to hurt them. I believe you. Then let me try. Monique shook her head. This isn't something you try because you suddenly know the truth. He remained silent. I've spent 3 years building a life where they feel safe. They trust the people who are in their world. They know what tomorrow looks like. They don't spend their nights wondering who's coming home. Her words weren't meant to punish him. They were simply the life she had built. I can't introduce uncertainty into that because you're hurting today. Raymond slowly nodded. He understood. It still hurt. I've earned that answer. You have. The honesty between them left no room for pretending. Monique reached into her handbag and removed a sealed envelope. She placed it on the table. Raymond looked at it, but didn't touch it. What's this? A boundary. He frowned slightly. She pushed the envelope toward him. I wrote it because I didn't want either of us relying on memory after today. He carefully opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. He began reading. Raymond, please don't come to their preschool. Please don't try to find our home. Please don't wait outside places you think we might visit. Please don't ask relatives, friends, or neighbors about the children. And please don't try to arrange an accidental meeting. If the day comes when I believe contact is truly in Aiden, Arya, and Avery's best interest, not yours, not mine, but theirs, I will be the one to reach out. Until then, the greatest gift you can give them is respecting the peaceful childhood they've been allowed to have. Monique. Raymond read the letter twice. The words never became easier. He folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. I'll respect it. Monique searched his face. You mean that? Yes. You won't try to find us? No. Even saying the words hurt. But... He looked down briefly. I'd spend the rest of my life wondering about them. I know. I'll wonder what Aiden's favorite sport is. A small smile crossed Monique's face. He changes his mind every week. Raymond let out the quietest laugh. I'll wonder whether Arya still comforts everyone. Monique looked surprised. You noticed that? At the wedding. She nodded. That's exactly who she is. And Avery. He smiled sadly. She looks like she asks a lot of questions." Monique laughed softly for the first time since sitting down. "More than I can answer." The laughter faded. So did the smile. "They're wonderful children. I don't doubt that. And they deserve better than adults trying to repair old mistakes through them." Raymond nodded. "They do." He understood now. Meeting them immediately wouldn't heal anything. It would satisfy his need for relief. Monique wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting 3 children who had done nothing wrong. He looked at her one last time. "I don't expect forgiveness." She answered without hesitation. "I've already forgiven you." He stared at her. "Then why does this hurt so much?" Monique's expression softened. "Because forgiveness and consequences aren't the same thing." The words settled over the table. Simple, true, impossible to argue with. After paying for their drinks, they walked outside together. The afternoon had grown cooler. Cars moved steadily through the streets of Lincoln Park. For a few moments, neither of them moved toward their cars. Raymond broke the silence. "Thank you for meeting me." "I almost didn't." "I'm glad you did." "So am I." Not because the conversation had been easy, because it was finally honest. Monique stepped backward toward her car. "I need to get back. They'll be waiting." She smiled. "They always are." He nodded. "I hope." He stopped himself. She waited. "I hope they keep laughing the way they did at the wedding." "They will." She opened her car door. "Goodbye, Raymond." He knew better than to ask when he would see her again, or the children. He simply nodded. "Goodbye, Monique." She drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. Raymond remained standing beside the sidewalk until her car disappeared into traffic. Only then did he climb into his own. The envelope rested on the passenger seat. He placed one hand over it before starting the engine. 3 years earlier, he had ignored the most important conversation of his life because he believed tomorrow would always be there. Now, tomorrow belonged to 3 children who didn't know his face. And for the first time, Raymond understood that loving them meant honoring the boundary their mother had set, even if it was the hardest thing he had ever been asked to do. Life settled into a rhythm that looked ordinary from the outside. Raymond went back to work on Monday. He answered emails, LED meetings, reviewed contracts, laughed when coworkers made jokes. No one at the office noticed anything unusual. If anything, they assumed he was adjusting to married life. Only Claire noticed the difference. She found him one evening standing in the children's section of a department store. He wasn't shopping. He was simply looking. A little boy ran past, holding a firefighter helmet, while his father chased after him. "Slow down." The father laughed. "You'll trip." The boy only laughed harder. Raymond watched until they disappeared around the corner. Claire quietly walked beside him. "I've called your name twice." "I'm sorry." She looked toward the display of children's backpacks. "You've been doing that a lot." "What?" "Getting lost somewhere." He nodded faintly. "I know." She slipped her hand into his. "You don't have to tell me everything." "I know, but you don't have to carry everything alone either." He squeezed her hand gently. "I appreciate that." And he meant it. Claire had never asked him to pretend. She had never demanded that he forget his past. Yet every day since the cafe, Raymond had begun understanding that the hardest consequences were often invisible. No one could see them. No one could fix them. They simply became part of the person carrying them. The envelope Monique had given him remained in the top drawer of his desk at home. He never needed to read it again. He already knew every word. Sometimes he opened the drawer anyway, not to question the boundary, only to remind himself why it existed. One Saturday afternoon, he almost drove toward the neighborhood where he believed Monique lived. He caught himself halfway there. At the next intersection, he turned around. When he arrived home, he sat in the driveway for nearly 20 minutes before going inside. Claire found him later in the kitchen. "You went somewhere." "I almost made a mistake." She didn't ask what kind. She simply nodded. "I'm glad you didn't." "So am I." He had made Monique a promise. For the first time in years, he intended to keep it. Certain moments became unexpectedly difficult. A father lifting his daughter onto his shoulders at the zoo. A family laughing together at a pancake restaurant on Saturday morning. A little boy proudly showing his father a drawing outside a preschool classroom. None of those families knew Raymond. They didn't know why he sometimes looked away, or why he lingered for a second longer than everyone else before continuing on. He wasn't jealous of them. He mourned what he had never lived. He found himself imagining impossible moments. Would Aiden have wanted him to read the same bedtime story 5 nights in a row? Would Arya have reached for his hand crossing busy streets? Would Avery have asked him endless questions during car rides? He would never know, not because someone had stolen those moments from him, because he had missed the one conversation that could have changed everything. That truth never stopped following him. Weeks later, Raymond visited his parents for Sunday dinner. His mother noticed he had grown quieter. "You've hardly touched your food." "I'm all right." She gave him the familiar look mothers reserve for answers they don't believe. "Work?" "No." "Married life?" Claire smiled gently. "We're doing fine." His mother looked between them. "Then what is it?" Raymond set his fork down. For years, he had let everyone believe the divorce had a simple explanation. He couldn't do that anymore. "I owe both of you something." The room became still. His father leaned back in his chair. "What do you mean?" "I let everyone think Monique was the reason our marriage ended." His mother frowned. "You said you grew apart." "We did. But I left out my part." No one interrupted. "I stopped listening. I chose work over home. I kept believing tomorrow would always be there." His voice remained calm. "I wasn't unfaithful physically, but emotionally." He paused. "I left the marriage long before the paperwork." His mother lowered her eyes. Raymond continued, "When people blamed Monique, I stayed quiet. I shouldn't have." His father let out a slow breath. "So, the stories weren't true? Not the way people told them." The room remained silent for several moments. Finally, his mother reached across the table and rested her hand over his. "Have you told Monique this? She doesn't need to hear it." He smiled sadly. "She lived it." That evening, after they returned home, Claire stood beside the bedroom window watching the lights outside. "You've changed." Raymond looked up from the book he hadn't actually been reading. "I hope that's a good thing." "I think it is." She walked over and sat beside him. "I used to think guilt only made people look backward. And now? I think real accountability changes how people move forward." He nodded thoughtfully. "I can't change what I did." "No." "I can't ask Monique to trust me." "No." "I can't ask the children to know me." Claire reached for his hand. "But you can decide who you become from here." He looked at her. For the first time since the wedding, he felt something that wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness either. It was acceptance. Not acceptance of what had happened. Acceptance that consequences didn't disappear simply because someone finally understood them. Some losses remained, not to punish, but to teach. Later that night, Raymond walked onto the apartment balcony. The city stretched quietly beneath him. Somewhere beyond those lights, 3 children were probably finishing bedtime stories, brushing tiny teeth, asking for one more glass of water before sleep. He smiled despite the ache in his chest. He hoped they were laughing. He hoped they felt safe. He hoped they never carried the weight of the choices adults had made before they were born. Then he looked up at the night sky and whispered words no one else was there to hear. "I'm sorry I wasn't there." The wind carried the words away. No answer came. He hadn't expected one. Some apologies are spoken not because they can change the past, but because finally telling the truth is the least a person can do after living too long without it. Spring arrived quietly in Chicago. The triplets had grown taller almost without Monique noticing. Aiden had become fearless on his bicycle, convinced that every scraped knee was proof he was getting stronger. Arya still carried more kindness than most adults Monique knew. She had developed a habit of checking on classmates who sat alone during lunch, often giving away half of her own snack before remembering she was supposed to eat it. Avery asked questions about everything. Why did birds never crash into each other? Why did grown-ups drink coffee every morning? Why couldn't Rain decide whether it wanted to stay or leave? By the end of most days, Monique had answered hundreds of questions. The ones she couldn't answer became adventures they tried to figure out together. Life wasn't easy. It was simply full. One Saturday morning, the apartment smelled of pancakes. Aiden stood on a kitchen chair, stirring batter with complete confidence. "I think it needs more chocolate chips." Monique smiled. "I think you're trying to invent dessert." "It can be breakfast too." Aria carefully arranged strawberries into little flowers on each plate. Avery opened the refrigerator. "We're almost out of milk." Monique looked inside. "So we are." "I can buy some." "You don't have a driver's license." "I know." Avery sighed dramatically. "I'm planning ahead." The kitchen erupted with laughter. Moments like these had become the rhythm of their home. Not perfect, not expensive, but filled with the kind of ordinary happiness Monique had once feared she would never find again. At the community center, where she now served as director of family outreach, Monique had become someone younger employees often sought for advice. One afternoon, a new coordinator named Elena lingered after a meeting. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you stay so calm?" Monique laughed softly. "I don't. You always seem calm." "I've simply learned there's a difference between reacting and responding." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "I heard someone mention you raised your children alone." "I did. I don't know how you managed." Monique looked through the office window toward families arriving for an after-school program. "There were days I didn't think I was managing at all." "What changed?" "I stopped asking why my life didn't look the way I'd planned." She smiled, "and started asking what my children needed from the life we actually had." Elena stood quietly for a moment. "I hope I remember that." "So do I." That evening, the triplets spread blankets across the living room floor for what they proudly called camping night. The lights were switched off. A flashlight rested between them. Aiden insisted every story needed a dragon. Aria wanted the dragon to become everyone's friend. Avery interrupted every few minutes with another question. "Did dragons brush their teeth?" "No." "Then their breath must have been awful." The room filled with laughter. After the stories ended, and the children finally drifted to sleep beneath their blanket fort, Monique carefully tucked the edges around them. She stood there for a long moment. There had been a time when she worried they might grow up feeling incomplete. Instead, they had grown up feeling loved. That realization mattered more than anything else. Questions about their father came more naturally now. One Sunday afternoon, while planting flowers on the apartment balcony, Aria looked up. "Mama?" "Yes?" "If we ever meet our dad." Monique paused. "Would you be happy?" The question deserved honesty. She brushed a little soil from her hands before answering. "I'd be happy if meeting him ever became something that was truly good for all three of you." "So, maybe?" "Maybe." Aiden frowned. "Is he a bad person?" Monique answered immediately. "No." "Then why doesn't he come here?" She looked at each of them before speaking. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions they wish they could take back. Like when Avery cut her own hair. Avery covered her face. "I said I was sorry." Monique smiled. "A little more serious than that." The children giggled. Then Aiden asked the question she had always known would come. "Does he know about us?" She held his gaze. "Yes." "When?" "Recently." Three small faces watched her carefully. "Was he surprised?" "Very." "Is he sad?" Monique thought about the afternoon in the cafe. She remembered the tears Raymond had tried to hide. "Yes." "He is." No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Avery reached across the table and slipped her hand into Monique's. "Are you sad?" Monique smiled. "Not anymore." The answer was true. Not because the past no longer mattered, because it no longer controlled her. That night, after the children were asleep, Monique opened an old storage box she hadn't touched in years. Inside rested a faded blue ribbon, the ribbon that had once wrapped the little gift box on the dining table. Beneath it lay a single ultrasound photograph. She held it for a moment before placing it back inside. There was no anger attached to it anymore, only memory. She closed the lid and slid the box back onto the closet shelf. Some parts of life deserve to be remembered. They didn't deserve to become places a person kept living. Before turning out the bedroom light, Monique glanced toward the hallway. 3 bedroom doors stood slightly open, just the way the children liked them. She smiled to herself. Years earlier, she had believed losing her marriage meant losing the future she had imagined. She had been wrong. The future had simply arrived, wearing a different face. It had arrived with 3 curious children, messy breakfasts, bedtime stories, scraped knees, endless questions, and a home where love wasn't measured by what had been lost. It was measured by who showed up every single day. And tomorrow morning, just as always, 3 little voices would call for her before the sun had fully risen. She already knew her answer. "I'm coming," because she always did. Summer arrived with longer evenings and playgrounds filled with children, whose laughter carried across the neighborhood until the streetlights came on. Raymond had learned not to follow every impulse. There were afternoons when he found himself wondering whether Aiden still loved dinosaurs, whether Aria still made friends wherever she went, or whether Avery had found answers to half the questions she asked. He never searched for them. Not once. More than once, he drove past the exit that would have taken him toward Monique's neighborhood. Each time, he continued straight. The boundary she had given him was no longer a piece of paper in a desk drawer. It had become a promise, and after spending years breaking promises without realizing what they cost, he refused to break another one. His relationship with Claire changed too, not because they loved each other less, because honesty had quietly replaced certainty. One evening they sat together on the apartment balcony, watching the last light disappear behind the Chicago skyline. Claire rested her head against his shoulder. "I've been thinking." Raymond smiled faintly. "That usually means I'm about to be asked something difficult." "It does." She looked up at him. "Do you regret marrying me?" He turned immediately. "No. I needed to hear you say it." He reached for her hand. "What I regret happened long before I met you." Claire nodded. "I know." She had come to understand something important. Monique wasn't standing between them. The past was, and there was no competition with the truth. Claire squeezed his hand. "Then let's make sure we don't build our marriage the way your first one slowly fell apart." He smiled. "No more conversations that can wait until tomorrow." She laughed softly. "Deal." It became an unspoken habit after that. When one of them said, "Can we talk?" the others stopped what they were doing. It was a small change. Raymond understood better than most how small changes could alter an entire life. Months passed. Birthdays came and went. Seasons changed. Raymond marked the triplets' birthdays privately, on a calendar no one else knew about. He never celebrated them publicly. He never mailed gifts. He never asked mutual friends for photographs. Every year, on that date, he simply took the afternoon off work. Sometimes he walked through Lincoln Park. Sometimes he sat beside Lake Michigan, watching families pass by. He imagined 3 children growing a little taller, learning a little more, laughing a little louder. Then he went home. That was the consequence he had accepted, not because someone forced him to, because respecting Monique's decision was the first truly selfless act he had ever made for his children. Monique never spoke badly about Raymond, not to friends, not to co-workers, certainly not to the triplets. When questions came, she answered only what the children needed to know. Never more, never less. As they grew older, they understood one thing clearly. Their mother had never tried to make them choose between love and truth. She had simply protected both until they were old enough to carry them. Mrs. Evelyn Harper noticed it one afternoon while watching the children play in the park. "You've done something very difficult." Monique smiled. "What?" "You raised them without teaching them bitterness." Monique watched Aiden helping another little boy back onto his bicycle after a fall. Aria was sharing bubbles with 2 younger children. Avery was trying to convince a pigeon that breadcrumbs counted as vegetables. I almost didn't. Mrs. Harper looked at her. "There were nights I wanted someone to blame." "And?" Monique smiled. "I realized children learn forgiveness long before they learn resentment." She looked toward the playground. "I wanted them to keep that gift for as long as possible." Mrs. Harper nodded quietly. "They're fortunate to have you." Monique shook her head. "We're fortunate to have each other." On the anniversary of Claire and Raymond's wedding, Raymond found himself passing the same hotel where everything had changed. He stopped across the street. The ballroom lights glowed behind tall windows. Another wedding, another couple, another beginning. He smiled sadly. For years he had believed the most important decision of his life had been signing divorce papers. Now he knew better. The most important decision had happened long before that. It had been the night he answered, "Tomorrow will be fine." He stood there for another minute before turning away. Some memories were not meant to imprison a person. They were meant to remind them who they never wanted to become again. Not long afterward, Monique tucked the children into bed after another ordinary day. Aiden insisted he was too old for goodnight kisses. He accepted one anyway. Aria wanted an extra story. Avery wanted one more question answered. Does every story have a happy ending? Monique smiled as she pulled the blanket over her daughter's shoulders. No. Avery frowned. Then how do you know when it's over? Monique thought for a moment. It's over when people finally tell the truth. Avery seemed satisfied with that answer. Within minutes, all 3 children were asleep. Monique quietly closed their bedroom doors halfway, leaving them open just enough for the hallway light to reach inside. She stood there, listening to the peaceful rhythm of 3 children breathing. Then she thought about the wedding. She hadn't gone there to embarrass Raymond. She hadn't gone hoping he would suffer. She hadn't gone to expose a secret. She had gone because, for too long, silence had allowed other people to tell the story of her life. Walking into that ballroom had been the first time she reclaimed it, not with anger, not with revenge, simply by refusing to hide. And in the end, that had been enough. Some stories end with people finding their way back to one another. This one didn't. Raymond remained a man who carried a love he had discovered too late. Monique remained a woman who chose peace over bitterness. 3 children continued growing in a home where they were deeply loved, carefully protected, and never asked to carry the weight of mistakes they did not make. The past could not be rewritten. The missed birthdays would never be celebrated again. The first words would never be heard. The tiny hands that once reached for someone who wasn't there had long since learned to reach for the people who were. That was the cost of one broken promise. It was also the beginning of a different kind of truth. Some mistakes can be forgiven. Some relationships can heal in unexpected ways. But true accountability is not measured by how desperately someone wants another chance. It is measured by the humility to accept that not every consequence can be undone. And sometimes the greatest act of love is respecting the life that moved forward without you.